Today I'm going to talk about a war you've never heard of, which led to the deaths of upwards of 6 million people, and the concept of religious freedom, which a lot of us take for granted today. Now, this was a long war, 30 years to be exact. In fact, it's called the 30 Years' War. Let's go. This war was a culminating event known as the Reformation, the last big-ditch effort to murder each other over religion. Reformation started in 1517 when Martin Luther nailed on the doors of Wittenberg a 95 Theses arguing why the Catholic Church is corrupt. This event will lead to millions of people dying over some variation of religion. Even though they're both Christian, they're different. Now, the Reformation spreads amongst this territory known as the Holy Roman Empire and then eventually gets involved with all of Western Europe and Northern Europe too. Now, this so-called empire was not holy, not Roman, nor really an empire. In fact, that's Voltaire's quote for it, which makes sense. It's literally a bunch of city-states put together that don't really like the emperor that they have, but they will listen to him some points. And when religion gets involved, half go Catholic, half go Protestant. Later on, Calvinist. So why was everyone so pissed off? Well, the Catholic Church at the time was very corrupt. It had a lot of issues with it. And one of the big ones, of course, was the sale of indulgence, literally buying your way out of hell. Well, the Catholics literally were trying to build St. Peter's Basilica, which is a massive undertaking, which is very expensive. And they did it by literally selling indulgences. In other words, you buying your way out of hell, giving the church money, and they forgive you of your sins, and you don't have to go to hell. Yay. Well, Martin Luther creates a massive issue when he challenges the church on this and a whole bunch of other corruption issues. And half of Europe break with the Catholic Church and go into all these different faiths, in which most of them are basing their knowledge off of their reading of the Bible, which also is problematic. Now, the Catholic argument is Matthew 16:19. Jesus gives the keys to the first pope, and whatever the pope does on earth does in heaven. It's literally the symbol of the pope, the two keys. In other words, what the pope does happens in heaven, so therefore you can do whatever the hell you want if you're a pope. And if you know anything about your history, there have been some really awful popes, really bad. Alexander VI, probably one of the most famous for being the biggest piece of crap on the planet. Now, in the Holy Roman region, a bunch of wars broke out between the Catholic leagues and what was known as the Schmalkaldic League, who was backing up Martin Luther. Now, eventually these wars end with the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. What this treaty actually did was it said that each little city-state inside this territory has the right to choose if they want to be Catholic or Lutheran. Great, first step towards religious tolerance, kind of. Well, and then we get this guy over here, John Calvin, who comes out and changes the religion slightly. And all of a sudden you have some city-states that are like, nah, I want to be Calvinist, not Lutheran. This tension pissed off the Holy Roman Emperor, one Ferdinand II. Now, he hears the city of Prague is choosing to go the route of Calvinism, which was against that treaty I talked about earlier. So he sends his ambassadors and tells them that, hey, guess what? They're all going to be Catholic now. Like they actually had a choice before. Now they don't. Now, in Bohemia, they didn't really like that shit. In fact, when these ambassadors told the city council in Prague, they decided to throw these assholes out the window. An act known in history as the Defenestration of Prague. So there's that top window. They were chucked out that window. No. Magically, they survived. And there's two reasons for it, supposedly, depending on who you talk to. Let's start with the Catholics. Catholics said that the Virgin Mary herself, or possibly an angel, came down, captured these individuals, and brought them to the floor nice and safe, and they survived. Now, the Protestant faction said they threw them out the window, and they landed in a huge pile of manure, and that broke their fall, and that's why they survived. The story itself I find hilarious. But this starts a massive war known as the 30 Years' War. There are 4 phases in the 30 Years' War in which a lot of people are going to die. Millions of people are going to die. Now, phase 1 of this war literally is fought in Bohemia. Therefore, it's called the Bohemian phase. Now, this whole war breaks out, and most of Europe is going to fight in it. There's only going to be 2 countries that stay out of that, and that would be the Russians and the Brits. But Spain got sucked into this war right away because of religious issues, and they just have to be in close proximity. And this will be a massive decline on their empire from this point on. Well, I guess it'd be from the Spanish Armada on, but this is really going to be like one of those nails in the coffin. Long story short, first phase, the Catholics beat the dog piss out of the Protestants, and we're going to call it 1-0 Catholics. Now, phase 2 will be known as the Danish phase, in which the Danes are pissed about this whole situation, and they send in large numbers of troops to back up the Bohemians that were not Catholic. Now, they're led by their king, Christian IV, I believe. Now, the fighting is intense, and the Danes lose, and lose badly. Large numbers of troops get killed. It's massacres all over the place. It's rough. They end up dropping out of the war, and then we get to phase 3. Phase 3 will be known as the Swedish phase, in which the Swedes now jump into this war, protecting the Protestants against the Catholics, but this time they're going to kick the crap out of the Catholics. Now, they're led by a military genius by the name of Gustavus Adolphus, or I like to say, Dogface. Homeboy is a military genius. He fixes their cavalry, he adds pistols onto using lances, he starts using the concept of mobile artillery. Now, I'm not going to say that was really great at the time. It was actually pretty shitty, but it's the first attempt in this kind of direction. He also believes in succession of command, which is great because he literally is going to die in combat, and his second in command will continue to lead on, and literally they just kick ass. Now, what makes the third phase so interesting is it is paid for by the French. You can look at it this way: Swedish swords with French money. This is also what you can call a proxy war. What's great about this is a whole series of wars that broke out during the Reformation, all based off of religion. This is the first time the French, who were Catholic, chose to jump into this war on the Protestant side against Catholics. Now, the French that are doing this is one really famous Cardinal Richelieu. And if you're looking at a map, what the French are doing is they're looking at their neighbors to their right and their neighbors right below them, Spain, and they're like, they're all rivals. We would benefit greatly if they were weaker. Apparently, the Cardinal read Machiavelli. And yes, this is an example of what we call realpolitik. Now, after the second phase, we get something called the Edict of Restitution, which made all the area Catholic. By the end of the third phase, that gets annulled. Never happened. That's what annulment means. And we have a score now of Protestants 1, Catholics 2, as we're about to enter the last phase of this war, the bloodiest phase known as the French phase. Cardinal Richelieu, savage. Now, why do I bring this guy up and not Louis XIII? Because Louis XIII is not doing shit. Cardinal Richelieu is doing everything. He's literally running the government while Louis XIII is out, hunting, drinking, and probably doing terrible things. I don't know. Now, by this phase of the war, the French are fresh. All the other sides have been fighting for years, and they're exhausted, and the French just run them right over. So this war will end in 1647 with the Treaty of Westphalia, the first modern treaty. Now, the positive aspects of this, of course, is new states are kind of set aside. Nationalism of individual states starts to grow at this point. Also, religious tolerance between Catholics and Protestants is a thing. You also get the rise of the French as one of the dominant forces in Europe, or the dominant force in Europe, besides England and Russia, of course. Also, massive decline from the Spanish Empire and the Habsburgs. Now, militarily, we obviously now have professional armies that are set in motion. Obviously, they killed tons and tons of civilians. It's not good. Countries now have the ability to have standing armies that are professional. Now, there's some other positive aspects of this whole thing. Like, for example, why the United States has its First Amendment, freedom of religion. Well, the Reformation is one of the reasons for it. Why? Because people murdered each other over some asinine, really small, minute difference between one religion versus another religion. And the idea of leaving that in your government is not a good thing. This idea will be pulled out of the Reformation and studied really hard during the Enlightenment. Keeping in mind, the U.S. Constitution is an example of an enlightened document. And lastly, today, there's a reason why Europe is not as religious as the United States, and that is the Protestant Reformation. How bloody it was, and for what exactly. Hope this makes sense. Leave comments, let me know what you think, or any questions you have. Chabot.